Elena knew the kind of tiredness that soaked into your bones and made your teeth ache. It wasn't just physical tiredness. It was the kind that came from constantly trying to make $10 do the work of 50. It was 3 a.m. and the city outside the big neon-lit windows of the Comet Diner was starting its slow metallic shutdown. Most of the midnight rush, the folks coming off the night shift, the university students cramming on caffeine, the couples having one last argument, were gone. Now only the harsh glow of the yellow lights and the smell of stale coffee remained. Elena was 24 and the job was grinding her down like cheap sandpaper. Her hair, usually a vibrant tangle of dark curls, was pulled back so tight it gave her a headache, and the perpetually strained smile she wore felt glued to her face. She wasn't aiming for a 5-star career. She was aiming for the end of the month, where the rent usually won the staring contest. Her manager, a man named Gus whose cynicism had long ago wrinkled his face into a permanent scowl, was already counting the till in the back office. Gus was the kind of person who saw the world in shades of gray, mostly dark gray, and had zero tolerance for optimism or customers who left tiny tips. Elena picked up a sticky tray and walked toward the last occupied booth in the far corner. It was a private half-moon booth often used by people who didn't want to be seen. A little less than an hour ago, it had been occupied by a single man. This man hadn't been a regular. He was different. Most of the late-night crowd wore jeans or worn suits. This man wore quiet, heavy wealth. His suit looked tailored, the kind that whispered expensive rather than shouting it, and his shoes gleamed like wet obsidian. Elena had barely made eye contact. His stillness and the cool, heavy way he moved had felt like a low, persistent hum of power in the room. He had barely spoken, paid his check with a large denomination bill, and walked out without a glance back. Intimidating wasn't the right word. It was more like walking past a great white shark and noticing how smoothly it swam. Now, as Elena wiped down the vinyl seat, her hand bumped something hard and cold. She reached into the dark crevice between the backrest and the cushion. Her fingers closed around a weight. She pulled it out and the air seemed to catch in her throat. It was a wristwatch. But calling it a watch was like calling a sports car a vehicle. This was heavy. Solid gold, not the cheap plating you found at the mall. The face was a deep, matte black, simple and elegant, but the gold bracelet was thick, intricate, and felt substantial enough to anchor a small boat. It didn't just tell time, it demanded respect. It was the kind of watch you inherited from a king or earned by building an empire. Elena held it in her palm and the watch seemed to radiate heat even though it was cool metal. It was worth more than her car, probably more than her rent for the next 6 months. The sound made her jump. Gus had emerged from his office, his heavy footsteps crunching on the tiled floor. He was already shrugging into his worn jacket, ready to bolt the moment she finished up. "What is that, Elena?" Gus's voice was flat, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, were locked on the glinting gold in her hand. "A customer left it, Gus." "In the booth," she said, holding it out automatically. "It's a really expensive watch." Gus didn't even touch it. He just peered closer, his scowl deepening. He rubbed his chin with his greasy hand. "Yeah. Looks like it," he murmured. "Listen, don't put that in the lost and found box." Elena paused. "Why not? We log everything, don't we? It belongs to the man who was sitting here." Gus took a step closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially, the way people do when they are about to suggest something entirely unethical. "Look, sweetie, nobody who owns a timepiece like that forgets it. They never forget it. They come back for it within 5 minutes, not an hour later. If they haven't come back, they either don't care or they don't want to come back for it right now." He glanced around the empty diner. "It's late. You finish up. Stick it in your apron pocket. You bring it to me tomorrow morning before the first shift." "Okay." Elena's spine straightened slightly, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She didn't like the look in his eyes. Gus wasn't planning on doing a public service announcement. He was planning on making a private deposit. "I can just call the police in the morning, Gus. They can log it as found property." Gus chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "The police? And then what? Some desk sergeant wears it for a year? Oh, Elena. You keep it quiet. You give it to me. I'll take care of it." He put his hands on her shoulders, the gesture surprisingly heavy. "And if the rightful owner ever comes back, which he won't, we'll cross that bridge then. This is how the world works, kid. Don't be naive." He squeezed her shoulder, gave her a knowing, unpleasant look and walked away toward the side door. "Lock up behind me. See you tomorrow." And just like that he was gone, leaving Elena standing alone with the weight of the watch and the much heavier weight of his unspoken instruction. She slipped the watch into her apron pocket, and the cool metal felt like a hot coal against her thigh. "Keep it quiet." That was Gus's code for "take it or I will." But Elena couldn't. Her mother, who had worked 2 jobs her entire life and taught Elena that honesty was the only thing no one could ever take away from you, would have been furious. To pocket this watch, knowing it belonged to someone else, felt like taking a wrecking ball to the last foundation of her self-respect. She finished cleaning the last tables quickly, her mind racing. She didn't want Gus to have it. She didn't want the police to take it. She wanted the man who owned it to get it back. The memory of the man flooded back. The tailor-made suit, the sharp eyes that missed nothing, the silent authority. She remembered him raising his hand slightly to check the time, the gold flashing under the diner lights. She pulled the watch out again under the harsh kitchen light. There had to be a way. A clue. She turned it over in her hand, feeling the finely polished metal of the case back. It was smooth, but as she tilted it just so, catching the light perfectly, she noticed something small, almost microscopic, etched into the gold. It was a single stylized initial, so subtle it was nearly invisible. An intricate, almost royal-looking V. It wasn't much. But it was something. It was better than nothing, better than the cold, cynical instruction Gus had left her with. That V felt like a little path out of the moral swamp. Elena knew this was foolish. She was exhausted, broke, and now she was planning a needle-in-a-haystack search for a man who looked like he had stepped out of a movie about high-stakes criminals. She didn't have a name, a phone number, or an address. All she had was a heavy gold watch and an initial. She punched the codes into the alarm panel, locked the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the cold, deserted pavement. The city felt vast and indifferent, swallowing up secrets. She paused under the weak street lamp, slipping the watch carefully into the small zipped compartment of her handbag, the safest place she owned. She wasn't a hero and she definitely wasn't a detective. She was just Elena, a tired waitress who was trying to do the right thing, even when the right thing felt terrifying and ridiculously inconvenient. She didn't know the man who owned the watch was Damien Valerio, the dreaded Ghost King. She only knew one thing for certain. She was going to find the owner, give him back his watch, and prove to herself that honesty was worth more than its weight in gold. Walking home in the deep pre-dawn quiet, Elena felt the weight of the watch in her bag. It wasn't the weight of money or danger. It was the weight of a decision. And for the first time all day, a fragile, hopeful warmth began to bloom in her chest. She had chosen integrity, and tonight that was the greatest victory of all. She smiled, tired but resolute, facing the daunting city and the mysterious V, with a small, steady breath. The next afternoon, Elena walked straight into the kind of situation her mama used to warn her about. The kind where the hair on your arm stands up and your brain screams, "Turn around, child. This is not for you." She had spent hours searching the few clues the watch offered. The simple V initial, combined with the extreme quality of the piece, led her to a small private jeweler's name she found through a deep dive on a local forum. The jeweler, in turn, was loosely connected to a property address. A large, repurposed warehouse tucked away in a quiet, industrial part of the city, the kind of place that looked like it stored expensive mistakes. This place was not like the friendly, buzzing diner. The building was a wall of dark brick, silent and unforgiving. There were no visible signs, no logos, just high, tinted windows and a single heavy steel door that looked like it could stop a tank. More importantly, there were the men. 2 of them stood outside, near a pair of polished black SUVs that looked too clean for the dirty street. They were both tall, tailored in dark suits and completely motionless. They weren't leaning on the cars or checking their phones. They just stood, radiating the kind of calm, professional danger that made Elena's palms sweat inside her coat pockets. They had thick necks and eyes that didn't just watch the street. They seemed to be cataloging the motives of every passing pigeon. Elena stopped across the street. She took a breath, the cold air burning her lungs. "You came this far, Elena. You do this and then it's over." She adjusted the small sling bag containing the gold watch. She walked across the street, focusing on the rough texture of the pavement, trying to make her steps look casual when every part of her wanted to sprint in the opposite direction. As she approached the sidewalk, the 2 men shifted, their attention snapping to her with unsettling speed. "Excuse me," Elena said, and her voice sounded weak and reedy, completely unfamiliar. She pulled her shoulders back, trying to channel the energy of a woman who wasn't currently terrified. "I'm looking for the owner of this watch." The taller man, whose face was completely expressionless, stepped slightly forward. He looked her up and down, the cheap coat, the sensible shoes, the clear panic in her eyes, and his silence was worse than any aggressive question. "You should move on," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly monotone, like he hadn't used it much recently. "I know," Elena insisted, pulling the watch out of her bag. The gold glinted briefly in the weak sunlight. "I worked at the Comet Diner last night. The gentleman who was here, he left this behind." She held it out on her open palm. The watch was a ridiculous contrast to her environment, a beacon of pure wealth against a backdrop of cold, ruthless efficiency. The two men exchanged the briefest glance, a tiny flicker of communication that spoke volumes about their shared disdain for this distraction. "Give it here," the second man said, extending a gloved hand. He didn't ask her name or where she found it. He simply commanded. Elena hesitated for a split second. She wanted to say, "Tell the owner I insisted on returning it personally." She wanted credit for her massive bravery. But she realized that pride didn't belong in this equation. This was about survival and integrity. She just wanted out. She placed the heavy watch into his gloved hand. He weighed it, his eyes never leaving her face, as if expecting her to suddenly reveal a hidden camera or a hidden police badge. "Thank you," she managed, already backing away. The second man, holding the watch, spoke into a hidden microphone near his collar. "The package has been delivered. Waitress. Young female." Before Elena could fully turn to flee, the first man spoke again, his face still devoid of emotion. "Why did you come here? Why didn't you just keep it?" The question was blunt and it stopped her. It wasn't a threat, it was genuine curiosity, or maybe just a test. Elena took a shaky breath. "Because it's not mine," she said simply, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "If I kept it, I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror. It felt too heavy to keep." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned quickly and walked back across the street, refusing to run, trying to maintain the shred of dignity she had left. She felt the silent, crushing weight of their stares on her back until she turned the corner. Upstairs, behind the soundproofed glass and reinforced concrete, Damien Valerio sat in a chair that cost more than Elena's entire apartment building. He wasn't simply watching, he was observing, analyzing, and calculating. He was the Ghost King, not because he was invisible but because he was always one step ahead. Damien was a man of cold, severe beauty. He had dark hair, eyes the color of iced coffee, and a face that rarely betrayed emotion, making him difficult to read, a necessity when your business was trust and betrayal. He was not a brute. He was a strategic predator who treated loyalty like a valuable, tradable commodity. He had left the watch deliberately. It was a test, a small price to pay to see if the establishment he occasionally used for discreet meetings had honest staff. He expected the manager to keep it, or maybe a busboy. He certainly did not expect a nervous, underpaid waitress to track down his opaque headquarters and return it herself. He watched Elena on the multiple monitors. Her hesitation, the way her hand trembled as she held the gold, and the sincerity in her eyes when she said, "Because it's not mine." Damien leaned forward, a flicker of something close to amusement crossing his face. Honesty was a rare eccentricity and he was intrigued. He instructed his lead guard through the comms. "Run a full scan of the footage from the diner. Every angle. I want to see how she handled it." He didn't trust sincerity, he trusted evidence. His guards were thorough. Within minutes, the surveillance feed from the Comet Diner, recorded through a discreet camera hidden near the air vent, was playing back on a massive screen. Damien watched the scene unfold again. Elena, tired cleaning the booth, finding the watch. The guard, Luca, spoke over the internal comms. "Nothing, boss. She finds it, looks shocked, tucks it in her apron. No attempt to check for witnesses, no signal. She's clean." Damien nodded, confirming his own observation. She truly was honest. A foolish, brave girl. He was about to turn away when something caught his attention. A tiny, insignificant detail that the human eye might miss. He commanded, "Freeze that frame. Frame 24 when her hand is under the cushion." The image locked. Elena's hand was digging into the crevice. Zoom in on the cushion under the watch, Damien instructed, his voice now low and focused. The amusement was gone, replaced by a deep, icy dread. The screen zoomed in, pixelating slightly, but the object was undeniable. The watch, being heavy, had been resting on a very small, thin black plastic rectangle, no bigger than a postage stamp, that had been meticulously taped to the underside of the booth's cushion. This was not the watch's casing. It was a highly encrypted data card containing information so sensitive, it could bring down entire operations across 3 continents. As Elena pulled the heavy gold watch out, the adhesive tape, weakened by the constant pressure and heat, gave way. The tiny card had flipped, sticking briefly to the heavy metal case of the watch, and then in the same movement Elena's trembling fingers had accidentally swept it up, unknowingly burying it into the deep fabric lining of her coat pocket as she pulled the watch free. The card did not return with the watch. Damien stared at the image. The silence in the room was absolute. The test was not over, it had just begun. The honest waitress had not just returned a watch. She had walked away with the single most dangerous item he possessed. He took a slow, deep breath, his mind already churning through probabilities and threat assessments. He was still fascinated by her honesty, but now that fascination was buried under a mountain of urgency. Down on the street, Elena was walking faster now, turning onto a busy avenue, the traffic noise washing over her. She felt lighter, cleaner, the weight of the moral dilemma finally lifted. She had faced the dark building and the terrifying men and still chose to do the right thing. She smiled to herself, a genuine, tired, heartwarming smile. She was safe, she was honest, and the whole terrifying episode was over. She had won. But upstairs, the Ghost King was already making plans. He pressed a button on his desk console. "Contact the team," Damien said, his voice cold and commanding. "I need that waitress's full file. Everything. And Luca," he added, looking at the screen showing Elena walking away, "I need her found. No. But I want her unharmed. Do not engage. Just observe. The girl is innocent, but she is holding my life in her pocket." The day after she returned the watch, Elena tried hard to slide back into her normal life. She clocked in at the Comet Diner, tied her apron, and poured coffee with the same weary efficiency she always had. But inside something was broken. The old, familiar exhaustion was still there, but now it was layered with a brittle nervousness. Every time the heavy diner door chimed, she flinched. She kept expecting the man, Damien Valerio, to walk back in, or for one of his terrifyingly silent guards to sit down at the counter. But life, stubborn as it is, just kept flowing. The breakfast rush came and went, demanding more coffee and more hash browns. Still, the world felt less secure. Elena felt exposed, like a house with all its curtains wide open. She kept thinking about the heavy gold watch, wondering if she had truly made the right decision, or if she had simply traded one kind of trouble for another. During the slow afternoon lull, he came in. Elena recognized him instantly, though she couldn't remember his name. He was a regular but not a friendly one. She mentally called him the Quiet Tip. He always sat in the same corner booth near the window, not the one where she found the watch but one nearby. He ordered black coffee, drank it slowly, and read a newspaper or stared out the window. He was a plain man, wearing clothes that were neat but forgettable, a dark, slightly rumpled coat, sensible shoes. He looked like an accountant who was tired of numbers. But there was something about the way he sat. He never seemed relaxed. His eyes, the color of weak tea, constantly moved, not tracing people but scanning the exits and the ceiling. He had a way of looking at Elena when she served him that always made her feel uncomfortable, not leering but calculating. Like he was committing the details of her life to memory. "Just the usual today, sir?" Elena asked, placing the chipped white mug on the table. "Yes," he replied, his voice soft and slightly accented, maybe Eastern European. He didn't smile. "Thank you, Elena." He used her name and it felt like a tiny, cold pinprick on her skin. She quickly moved away, telling herself he was just a creepy, lonely guy. Lots of older men hung out in diners. It was normal. But the cold feeling didn't leave her stomach. She served out the rest of her shift, trying to ignore the man in the corner. When she finally clocked out around midnight, the man she called the Quiet Tip was gone. "Thank God," she mumbled to herself as she zipped up her light jacket. The night air was sharp and smelled of rain and exhaust fumes. "I hate when he just stares." She walked the few familiar blocks toward her apartment building. It was a route she knew by heart, past the dry cleaner and the deserted convenience store. The neighborhood was generally safe, but late at night the shadows stretched long, turning every noise into a potential threat. As she rounded the corner onto her street, she got that unmistakable feeling. The one every woman knows, the electric buzz on the back of your neck that tells you you're not alone. She tried to dismiss it as residual nerves from the watch incident. She casually checked her reflection in the dark glass of a closed storefront. And there he was. Not directly behind her but across the street, walking parallel, keeping the same steady, non-threatening pace. It was the quiet tip. A jolt of icy fear shot through her. He wasn't walking like someone heading home, he was walking like someone keeping track. She sped up her pace slightly. He sped up his. She slowed down. He adjusted, maintaining the distance. This wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate. Elena pulled out her phone and held it to her ear, pretending to be on a loud, casual conversation with an imaginary friend. Yeah, oh my gosh, it was the worst shift ever, Sarah. I'm totally exhausted. She spoke loudly, hoping to signal that she was connected, that someone knew exactly where she was. She risked another quick glance. He was still there, his dark coat blending into the shadows cast by the streetlights. He wasn't trying to hide, not really. He was just being present. She reached the familiar, slightly run-down brick wall of her apartment complex. The worst part was the small, badly lit parking lot in the back that she had to cross to get to her entrance. She sped across the asphalt, her keys already gripped between her fingers like a makeshift weapon. She glanced toward the line of overflowing recycling bins and rusted garages. And she saw him again. He wasn't across the street anymore. He was standing near the deep shadow cast by the biggest dumpster, facing the rear entrance of her building. He wasn't moving, just standing completely still, watching her. For Elena, the fear turned into a sharp, hot burst of anger. This wasn't some mysterious, high-stakes underworld plot. This was just a common creep, a man abusing his status as a customer to be a predator. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to go home and leave her alone. But the exhaustion and the fear won. She scrambled the last few steps, fumbling with her key for the heavy metal door. The man watching her wasn't a creep. His name was Yuri, and he worked for the Russian Vori V Zakwan, Damian Valerio's most dangerous rival in the city. Yuri wasn't interested in Elena's beauty or her company. He was interested in her significance. He watched her finally get inside and disappear behind the thick steel door. He wasn't annoyed by her awareness, he was impressed. She was jumpy, but she hadn't run. Yuri was reporting to his boss, Dmitri. Dmitri had heard the whispers through his own sources. Valerio, the Ghost King, had lost something important in a late-night diner, and the asset was recovered by some young girl who then had the boldness to walk right up to his fortress. Why would an exhausted, broke waitress have the courage to return a gold watch that valuable? Dmitri had reasoned. No ordinary girl does that. Dmitri had concluded that the girl, Elena, must be an asset. Maybe a new, highly trusted courier. Maybe a temporary drop-off point. Valerio would never risk losing a multi-million-dollar contact over a simple test of honesty. The return was the cover story. The gold watch was the signal. Yuri lowered the binoculars he was using and spoke into a tiny, secure radio clipped inside his collar. She's in, boss. Apartment 3B. He was spooked. Checked her reflection, made a fake phone call. Smart. And did she carry anything else? Dimitri's voice crackled, laced with impatience. No, boss. Just her handbag. Small. Looks like she only carried the watch on the initial run, or she passed the real package off earlier. But she is definitely the runner. No ordinary waitress is that aware of her surroundings at midnight. Yuri confirmed the intelligence. Valerio's people had been fooled by her cheap coat and waitress uniform. But the Russians wouldn't be. They would treat her like the essential contact she must be. They would wait and they would watch, believing that eventually Valerio would contact his crucial runner again. Inside her small, warm apartment, Elena leaned against the door, heart hammering against her ribs. She was shaking, but she wasn't crying. She slit the deadbolt, clicked the chain lock into place, and then for good measure wedged a cheap rubber doorstop under the frame. She moved around her apartment, drawing the blinds tight on every window, double-checking the locks on the old fire escape door. The exhaustion was crippling now, but she didn't collapse into bed. She walked into the tiny kitchen, poured a tall glass of water and stood still, breathing deeply, letting the panic subside. He's just a weirdo, Elena. But you dealt with him. She walked into her bedroom and opened her dresser. She pulled out a small, heavy aluminum baseball bat that she kept under a pile of sweaters, just in case. She placed it carefully beside her bed. Then she sat down on the edge of the mattress. He wasn't safe, not really. Not anymore. But she was alert. She was ready. That night she didn't feel like a weak, tired waitress. She felt like a protector of her own small corner of the world. She decided that tomorrow she wouldn't call a friend. She would call the landlord about getting a heavier lock. She lay down, the knowledge of the stalking man heavy in the air, but she pulled the covers up, closed her eyes and resolved that no man, creep or otherwise, was going to make her stop living her life. She was scared, yes, but more importantly she was awake. That resilience, that small internal surge of "I will not be beaten," was enough to close her eyes with a measure of peace. She was facing the dark and she was choosing to stand her ground. In his high-tech soundproofed office, Damien Valerio was doing something he rarely did, wasting time. He wasn't looking at spreadsheets or encrypted reports. He was staring at Elena's file. It was slim, boring, and utterly predictable. The file confirmed everything her clothes and her exhaustion suggested. 24 years old, high school education, worked at the Comet Diner, lived in a small low-rent apartment, no criminal record, no unusual financial movements, no known connection to any rival faction. She was, professionally speaking, a nobody. And yet, Damien kept watching her surveillance clip. He played the diner footage on a loop. The moment she found the watch, her wide eyes and the sincerity in her voice when she told his guard, it felt too heavy to keep. Damien was a man accustomed to cold, hard facts. In his world, every action had a hidden motive, and every gift came with a price tag attached. Elena's sheer, uncalculated honesty was like an unexpected burst of sunshine in a room designed for perpetual twilight. It was illogical and that irritated him. He told himself he was studying her posture, checking for tells that might reveal she knew about the encrypted data card. But deep down he knew that wasn't the only reason he kept replaying the clips. The door to his office opened, silent and seamless. Marco, his right-hand man, walked in. Marco was a decade older than Damien, ruggedly loyal, and possessed the kind of practical cynicism that kept them both alive. He didn't waste words. "The girl," Marco started, holding up a printout of the surveillance image of Elena. "The background checks are finished. He's clean, boss. Nothing. Not a runner, not a mule. Just a tired waitress." Damien didn't look up from the screen. "Then she knows nothing about the card," he concluded, his voice flat. "It was an accident." "Exactly," Marco agreed, stepping closer to the massive desk. "Which means we retrieve the card discreetly and we eliminate the witness risk. We make her forget us." Damien finally lifted his eyes, the icy coffee color of them fixing on Marco. "Retrieve the card, yes. But eliminate the risk? That is messy, Marco. And unnecessary." "Boss," she walked into the headquarters. She saw faces. She knows the address. She is a civilian who saw the Shark Tank. She is now a liability who holds a piece of our operation's survival in her pocket. The longer we leave her alone, the more chance the Russians have to find her. Marco's tone was tight, strained by concern. "The Russians are watching the girl who returned my watch, not the girl who knows about my card," Damien countered, pushing back against the reality of his own world. "They think she's a courier. If we hit her now, we confirm their theory. We wait." Marco paused, choosing his next words carefully. He knew his boss well, and the boss was currently behaving like a distracted schoolboy, not a king. "You're thinking too much about the girl, boss. She's irrelevant. She's a variable we need to remove, not study. She has courage, I'll grant her that. But involving a civilian in our game, especially one you find interesting, is the single most dangerous mistake we can make." Marco leaned in, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. "You risk everything for a moment of honesty. Don't get drawn to her, Damien. Don't mix business with sentiment." Damien stood up abruptly, signaling the end of the conversation. He walked toward the wall of glass overlooking the city, a king surveying his territory. "I am not drawn to her, Marco," Damien said, though the denial sounded hollow even to his own ears. He stared out at the sprawling, indifferent city where Elena was just one tiny, insignificant speck. "I am drawn to the security of my operations. The card is the priority. Her honesty is simply a puzzle piece. It tells us she won't sell the card to the highest bidder if she ever finds it. We focus on retrieval, not elimination. She is protected. Marco simply nodded, accepting the order but not the justification. He knew when his boss was lying to himself. 1,000 miles away, in a room that smelled perpetually of strong tobacco and cold efficiency, Yuri stood before Dmitri, the Russian boss. "The girl is not a professional, boss," Yuri confirmed, his soft voice contradicting the seriousness of the information he was delivering. "She is exactly what she looks like, a tired, low-level worker. She is not a runner for Valerio." Dmitri, a massive man with hands like granite and a face that looked like it had been carved from disappointment, slammed his heavy fist onto the desk. "Nonsense," he roared, shaking the glass of vodka sitting precariously near the edge. "Valerio does not waste time. He does not test the honesty of servants. Why did she go to the headquarters?" "Bravery may be foolishness," Yuri offered. "Her poverty is real. Her apartment is small. Her finances are checked." Dmitri ran a thick hand over his stubbled chin. "Then the connection is not professional. It must be historical." He snapped an order to his chief analyst, a nervous, precise woman named Svetlana. "Svetlana, run her family history. Not her parents. Every financial detail, every known address, every traffic ticket. We are looking for ghosts." The search took another agonizing 4 hours, but Svetlana was meticulous. She traced Elena's mother, Maria, back to a neighborhood she left 20 years ago. Then she cross-referenced that address with the names in a specific set of old, heavily coded documents, the infamous Valerio crime ledger. Svetlana's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. "Boss," she said, her voice barely a whisper, holding up the old, faded printout. "Elena is not the runner. But her mother, Maria Perez. Maria Perez used to date Marco Valerio, Damien's cousin, the one who disappeared." Dimitri's eyes widened slightly. "What does that mean?" "The ledger, boss. The one that detailed the betrayal in the Valerio family funds 20 years ago? The betrayal that put Damien on top." Svetlana pointed to a name circled in faint ink. Maria Perez's father was the accountant. He was listed as the man who set up the shell companies. The entire ledger disappeared the night the accountant did. Maria is the daughter of the man Valerio blamed for the greatest internal theft in his family history. Dmitri leaned forward, his massive frame radiating triumph. The sheer simplicity of the connection was terrifying. "So the watch," Dmitri mused, smiling a thin, cruel smile. "It was not a test of honesty. It was a lure. Valerio is looking for the daughter to find the missing ledger." He slammed his hand down again, this time with true force. "He does not care about the gold. He cares about the book that proves his power was built on a lie. He thinks the daughter has it." The Russians realized the true game. Elena was not a courier. She was the key to unlocking the past that Damien Valerio desperately wanted to keep buried. Back in his fortress, Damien was signing documents, his focus restored. He was still rattled by Marco's warning, but he had given the order. 2 of his best, most invisible operatives were now shadowing Elena from a distance. Their objective was retrieval of the card, but their secondary, unstated objective was to ensure she remained untouched by any outside forces. He was still telling himself it was about the card. He closed the file on Elena, forcing his attention back to his empire. But as he looked out at the lights of the city, a tiny, subconscious thought whispered in his mind. He didn't want the Russians to find the missing data card. But more than that, he didn't want the girl who chose honesty over convenience to be hurt by the darkness she had stumbled into. Damien allowed himself a final, fleeting thought. "Stay safe, Waitress." It was an order, not a hope. But in that moment, in the cold, complex heart of the Ghost King, a tiny flicker of human concern shone through the layers of cynicism, a silent promise of protection that Elena had unknowingly earned. The day after she was stalked, Elena felt different. She was still exhausted, but a new kind of strength had settled inside her. She had checked the locks, she had the bat, and she was going to face her life head-on. She walked into the Comet Diner that evening, ready for the grind of the dinner shift. She started her routine by heading straight for the employees' back room, a cramped space that smelled faintly of ammonia and old fryer oil. She went to her tall gray metal locker, the one with the sticky note on the door that read, "Elena's stuff." As she unlocked it and pulled her jacket out, something small and black tumbled from the lining of the coat pocket where she had put the gold watch 2 days earlier. It landed silently on the concrete floor. Elena bent down and picked it up. It was tiny, about the size of her thumbnail, and thin. It was made of dull matte black plastic, smooth and completely unremarkable. She turned it over in her fingers. It looked exactly like a cheap piece of plastic packaging, maybe a blank dummy key card or some forgotten bit of electronics trash. It was definitely nothing important. She certainly didn't connect it to the heavy gold watch or the terrifying headquarters. Why would she? It looked worthless. Ugh, another piece of junk, she muttered, annoyed by the clutter. She didn't want to carry it home. She walked out to the serving station. Under the counter where she kept her order pads and pens, there was a deep, dusty drawer where everyone tossed old menus, broken forks, and things that needed to be thrown out later. Without another thought, Elena flicked the tiny black object with her thumb. It spun once and landed silently among the rubber bands and unused sugar packets in the drawer. The data card, Damian Valerio's secret lifeline, the item that could destroy his empire and cost hundreds of lives, was now officially in the diner's junk drawer. Elena shrugged off the moment and grabbed her apron. The shift had begun. 5 hours later, after the midnight crowd had cleared, the Comet Diner was locked up tight. The heavy steel door was bolted, the lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the low, weary hum of the refrigeration units. But the peace didn't last. Around 2 a.m., a dark van pulled up 2 blocks away. Out stepped 3 men, silent and coordinated, wearing dark clothing and gloves. They were Yuri's team, the men sent by Dmitri. They didn't come through the front door. They went straight to the back alley, avoiding the few weak security cameras. They worked with cold, focused efficiency. A lock was picked on the delivery door in less than 30 seconds. A chain was clipped. They slipped inside like shadows being poured through a crack. They knew exactly where they were going. The girls' station, Yuri ordered, his voice barely audible even in the empty kitchen. And the locker room. She must have dropped it off here, thinking it was safer than her home. They moved through the darkened diner, the beam of their flashlights slicing through the stale air. This was not a robbery, it was a surgical hunt. They tore apart the corner booth where the watch was found, ripping the vinyl, checking the screws. Nothing. They moved to the service counter. They used crowbars to splinter open the cash registers, just in case, and then moved systematically through the drawers behind the counter. When they got to the employees' locker room, they didn't bother picking the locks. They used a hydraulic tool to force open the metal doors, one by one, twisting the cheap locks like aluminum foil. They emptied Elena's locker, tossing her worn sneakers and clean uniform onto the floor. But they couldn't find the card. The drawer with the rubber bands and old sugar packets was not a designated spot. It was just junk. They didn't bother with the garbage or the drawers full of actual trash. They found nothing. Frustrated, Yuri took his anger out on the manager's office door, smashing it open before checking the empty safe. They left the diner looking like a whirlwind had passed through, broken wood, ripped upholstery and scattered debris, but the small black card remained safely buried in a drawer of useless clutter. The alarm was immediately reported to the local police, but it was reported much faster to Marco, back at Damian's headquarters. "Boss, the Russians hit the diner," Marco announced, walking quickly into the command center where Damian was reviewing logistics. Marco's face was pale, his composure momentarily cracked. Damian's head snapped up. The diner? Not her apartment. No. They tore apart the diner. They focused on the back booths and the employee areas. Nothing was stolen except for maybe $50 in change from the old register. They were looking for something specific, Damian. Damian didn't need to be told. The puzzle piece clicked into place and the true danger became sickeningly clear. The card, Damian breathed, his voice dangerously low. The Russians realized she wasn't the runner. They realized she was the key to the card, and they assumed she was dumb enough to leave it at her workplace. And they didn't find it, Marco pointed out grimly. Which means they're going to reassess. And the next logical target is her home. Damian stared at the monitor showing Elena's quiet, dark apartment building. He saw the potential for absolute devastation. He had been so proud of himself for his subtle protection, for his distant analysis. Now, because of his vanity and his denial of the threat, the Russians were minutes away from breaking down her door. He had been watching her for her honesty, and now that honesty was going to get her killed. Get me Yuri's last known location, Damien snapped, standing up. Did they leave the diner? Are they on the move? They left the diner 10 minutes ago. We're tracking them now, but they're moving fast, heading east toward her neighborhood. Damien slammed his hand onto his metal desk. She's not ready for this, Marco. She thinks she's being stalked by a creep. She's expecting them to knock, not to kick down the door. All the detachment, all the cynical calculation vanished. He didn't care about the card anymore. He cared about the idea of that innocent girl, the one who chose integrity over profit, being caught in the crossfire of his war. Call off the shadows, Damien commanded, his voice sharp and absolute. Tell them to intercept the Russians before they get to her street. I want an absolute blockade. Distract them. Crash their vehicles. Do whatever you have to do to buy me 20 minutes. Marco was stunned. Damien, that's overt. That exposes us to the whole city. We'll lose our silence. I don't care about silence. Damien shouted, the control completely slipping away. The Ghost King doesn't let innocent civilians die because of his careless mistakes. Get a car ready for me now. I'm going to the diner. I have to find the card before the Russians realize they missed it. He stripped off his expensive tailored jacket, grabbed a concealed weapon from a drawer he had never let Marco see, and moved toward the door. You're going yourself, boss? Marco asked, his loyalty warring with his fear. Yes. She went to my headquarters to return what she thought was mine. I am going to her workplace to retrieve what I know is mine, and more importantly, to get the only leverage I have to save her life. Damien stopped at the door, his eyes blazing with fierce urgency. Call her cell phone until she answers. Tell her there's been an emergency at the diner and she must answer the door for someone I'm sending. Lie to her. Just get her ready to move. Now. Damien Valerio, the cold, calculating king, was finally acting on the raw, protective instinct that Elena's simple courage had ignited. He was racing toward the woman who was completely unaware that the man she feared was now the only one rushing to save her. He was leaving the safety of his fortress and venturing out into the night because love and justice, even the twisted justice of the Ghost King, demanded that he protect the innocent. He was coming for her, and in that desperate, urgent rush, Elena's chance for safety, hope, and an eventual positive ending was finally beginning. The Comet Diner was closed. A harsh yellow police tape crisscrossed the shattered front window, and the heavy side door where the Russians had pried their way in was boarded up with rough plywood. The smell of cold coffee was now mixed with the smell of wet plaster and frustration. Elena stood across the street in the late afternoon gloom. She had been giving a statement to the police about the break-in, trying to explain that the criminals hadn't seemed interested in money, only in something. She hadn't mentioned the gold watch or the mysterious man. She didn't dare. Her boss, Gus, stood next to her looking absolutely defeated. They just ruined the place, Elena, Gus mumbled, kicking a loose pebble with his shoe. We'll be closed for weeks. Did you see what they did to your locker? Elena shivered, remembering the sight of her few possessions scattered on the floor. I saw, Gus. It felt personal. Nothing personal about it. Just some lowlife trying to steal from the till. Don't worry about coming in. I'll call you when we reopen. Gus walked off, heading toward his car, leaving Elena alone on the deserted sidewalk. The break-in had confirmed everything the stalking man had started. The quiet, boring safety of her life was gone. She felt exposed, afraid, and totally bewildered. She clutched her worn purse, ready to start the paranoid walk home, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. The moment Gus's car turned the corner, the street grew unnaturally quiet. Then a black car appeared from nowhere. It wasn't driving fast, but it moved with purpose, silent and heavy, like a huge predator gliding in for a landing. It was the same make and model as the cars parked outside the fortress headquarters. It pulled up right next to her, stopping smoothly by the curb. The driver's door opened and Damien Valerio stepped out. He wasn't in the tailor-made suit she remembered from the diner. He was wearing dark, practical clothing, and his face was set in an expression of intense, cold focus. His eyes, the color of iced coffee, locked onto hers, burning away the gloom of the street. He looked less like a businessman and more like a warrior who had just emerged from a fight. He looked dangerous, but she also saw something in his eyes that wasn't there before. Urgency. Elena froze, her feet rooted to the pavement. The Ghost King, the terrifying man whose watch she returned, was here, standing 3 feet away. Elena, he said, his voice low and commanding, slicing through the silence. He didn't ask how she was or why she was there. He got straight to the point. Get in the car. Now. Elena finally found her voice, thin and strained. I don't know what you're talking about. I gave you the watch back. I don't want any trouble. This isn't about the watch anymore, Damien retorted, his patience razor thin. He took a single, controlled step closer. They hit your workplace. They are convinced you have something I lost. And they will hit your home next. We don't have time for talk. Who are they? Elena demanded, stepping backward slightly, her heart beginning to pound a frantic, trapped rhythm against her ribs. I'm calling the police. As if to answer her question, the terrifying quiet of the street was suddenly shattered. 2 blocks away, where the main street intersected with the quieter avenue, there was the sound of a violent, sickening impact, metal crunching metal followed by the screech of tires being abused, and then a quick series of sharp, muffled shouts. It sounded like a war had just erupted just out of sight. Elena spun around, her eyes wide with terror. Damien grabbed her arm, his grip firm and insistent, pulling her toward the open car door. That, he hissed, nodding toward the chaos, is them. They didn't find what they wanted at the diner, and my people just intercepted the ones heading for your apartment. They are the ones who want to hurt you. Now listen to me. Come with me if you want to live. His words were brutal, but the urgency in his eyes was authentic. Before she could process the shock of his ultimatum, 2 figures emerged from the chaos at the end of the block. They were running hard toward the diner. They were bulky, dressed in dark clothing, and they wore simple, featureless black balaclavas pulled tight over their faces. They weren't cops. They weren't ordinary criminals. They looked like something pulled from a nightmare. They saw Damien's black sedan. They saw Elena. And they changed direction, sprinting straight toward them. See, Damien said, his voice flat with grim triumph. They don't care about your police statement. They care about you. Elena stared at the masked figures bearing down on her. Her mind short-circuited. She was faced with 2 equally terrifying choices. Stay there and trust the system to protect her from the masked men who had just violently ambushed a car full of people, or jump into the car of the cold, powerful Mafia boss who terrified her but who, moments ago, had claimed to be protecting her. The sight of the masked men, faceless, ruthless, and charging directly at her, was the final devastating straw. They were the violence, the pure, unadulterated threat. Damien was the cold, hard man who offered a way out of the immediate danger. Her integrity had brought her here. Her fear was forcing her hand. Hurry, Damien urged, his eyes flicking between her and the approaching threat. He didn't let go of her arm. Elena's entire body was shaking, but she made a split-second decision based on raw survival instinct. She was more afraid of the men running toward her than the man standing next to her. She threw herself into the passenger seat of the car, scrambling across the plush leather. Damien didn't waste a second. He slammed the door shut, rounded the hood, and slid into the driver's seat. As he started the powerful engine, one of the masked men reached the curb. He fumbled inside his jacket. Hold on, Damien instructed, his voice now entirely professional, like a pilot preparing for takeoff. The car leaped forward with a silent surge of speed, tires momentarily squealing as they broke traction. They pulled away just as the masked man pulled out a heavy object, not a gun but a small, wicked-looking tactical knife, and hurled it uselessly at the retreating taillight. Elena pressed herself against the car door, hyperventilating. She dared to look back. The 2 masked men were standing in the middle of the street, watching them escape, their dark figures silhouetted against the faraway chaos of the ambush they had escaped. They looked furious. The car flew through the city streets, moving through traffic with a ruthless speed that somehow felt controlled. Elena was safe for now. She was trapped in a car with the Ghost King, hurtling away from everything familiar, her entire life now distilled to the simple, terrifying choice she had just made. He looked at Damien. His jaw was set, his profile sharp and unforgiving in the faint light from the dashboard. He had saved her. He was terrifying, yes, but he had actively placed himself in danger for her. She was now officially in his world, a world of masked men and sudden violence. But as she finally let out a shaky breath, Elena felt the raw, undeniable relief of survival wash over her. She was alive, she was safe from immediate harm, and the terrifying stranger had just proven through action that he was currently on her side. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Elena didn't feel alone. She was terrified, but she was under the protection of the one person who could truly offer it, confirming that her reckless integrity hadn't ruined her life, but perhaps, just perhaps, had saved it. The car ride was a blur of speed and silence. Elena sat rigid, the smell of expensive leather doing little to mask the lingering metallic scent of fear. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew she was miles away from the simple, predictable world of the Comet Diner. They stopped at a large, unassuming townhouse nestled on a quiet, tree-lined street in a part of the city Elena had only ever driven through. It looked completely normal on the outside, like a house where a wealthy doctor or lawyer lived. But the way Damien's guards melted out of the shadows the second the car stopped, opening the massive front door before Damien even touched the handle, spoke volumes. This was not a home. It was a fortress dressed in civilian clothing. Inside, the safe house was blindingly luxurious. High ceilings, polished wood floors, and art that probably cost more than Elena's 10 years of wages combined. It was immaculate, quiet, and unsettlingly cold. Damien led her past a minimalist living area to a bedroom. It was huge, featuring a king-sized bed draped in crisp white linen and large windows draped with heavy, dark curtains. "You'll stay here," Damien said, his voice flat and efficient. He hadn't touched her since he released her arm at the car, but his presence filled the room. "The door is secured and there are guards outside the floor. No one gets in. You are safe here." Elena stood in the middle of the room, still wearing her cheap, slightly damp coat. Her mind was racing, trying to catch up with the masked men and the screeching tires. "Safe," she finally managed, her voice cracking. "My workplace was just broken into and I was chased down the street by men in masks. How is any of this safe?" Damien didn't flinch. "It is safe now. My people intervened and the immediate threat has been neutralized. But this is temporary. One night. We will move you in the morning." He handed her a small, sleek phone. "This is a secured line. You can call your family if you need to, but say nothing about where you are or who you are with. Just tell them you're staying with a friend." He looked her up and down, a look of clinical assessment. "There are clean clothes in the closet, a shower, and food. Rest. You need it." He turned to leave. Elena, operating on pure adrenaline and rage, snapped. "Wait. You just upended my entire life and now you're telling me to sleep? You dragged me into this. Who are those men? Why are they looking for me? I just returned a watch." Damien paused at the threshold, turning slowly. The light in the hallway caught the harsh angles of his face. He didn't look angry. He looked weary, like a man carrying a weight he couldn't put down. "The men," he said, his voice softer now, almost patient, "are the people I fight. They believe you are a spy. They believe the watch was a signal. They believe you have a piece of paper that could ruin me." He paused, his eyes piercing hers. "You returned the watch because you are honest, Elena. And now your honesty has put you in the most dangerous spot in the city. I am here because I am the only person who knows you are innocent, and I am the only person who can keep you alive long enough for us to fix this. Sleep. I promise you I will not let them touch you." With that he walked out and closed the door with a quiet, solid click. Elena didn't sleep. She shed her clothes and took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the sticky layer of fear and road grime. She put on the clean, soft clothes she found. A simple, oversized gray sweatshirt and yoga pants that felt like silk. She walked around the huge, silent room. The bed was enormous and inviting, but every time she lay down her mind replayed the scene. The masked faces, the scream of the tires, Damien's cold, absolute command. She saw the little, unremarkable black card she had casually tossed into a junk drawer, realizing now with sick certainty that the piece of plastic was the reason her life had been detonated. Her entire history, her bills, her schedule, the struggle to pay rent, felt so small and insignificant now. It was all gone, swallowed by a dark, hidden world of power and violence. After 2 hours of pacing, she gave up on resting. She was hungry and she needed space. She quietly opened the door and crept down the hallway. She found Damien in a room across the hall that served as a minimalist office. He was sitting at a large, dark wood desk, bathed in the cool light of several computer monitors. He was talking into a private headset, his back to her, his voice low and intense. He was still in the dark clothes, his sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing the hard, practiced muscle of a man who was used to confrontation. He was working, calculating, controlling. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him unnoticed. This was the Ghost King, the dreaded man of immense power. But in this quiet, solitary moment, he just looked like a man buried under too many impossible responsibilities. He looked tired too. His hair was slightly disheveled, and the intensity in his profile wasn't cruelty. It was sheer focus. He finally ended the call and ran a hand through his hair, letting out a heavy, soundless sigh. It was a purely human gesture of fatigue. Elena pushed off the doorframe, making a quiet sound that broke the silence. He turned instantly, his movements fluid and quick, his eyes snapping to her with the intensity of a predator who had just spotted movement. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered, walking toward the kitchen area off the office. "I just needed water." Damien didn't move. He watched her fill a glass, his eyes still assessing. "It's normal. Your adrenaline is high." "Who was that on the phone?" she asked, turning to face him. She was no longer hysterical, just desperately curious. "My people. We are arranging countermeasures. We are planning the next move." She took a sip of water, her mind turning over the pieces he had given her. "You said the Russians think I have a piece of paper that could ruin you. What kind of paper is that? Why would they think that?" Damien hesitated. Sharing details was dangerous, unprofessional. But seeing her standing there, small in his massive high-tech sanctuary, her eyes wide with the confusion he had caused, he made a choice. He pulled back the curtains slightly. "That paper is an old family ledger," he admitted quietly, keeping his voice steady. "It details certain actions taken years ago. Actions that stabilized my position. If the Russians get it, they don't just hurt me, they hurt everything I have built." He paused, leaning back slightly in his chair. "They think you are connected through your family. They think the watch was the key to finding the ledger." Elena swallowed, connecting the pieces. Her mother, the watch, the violence. It was all a terrifying lineage she knew nothing about. "And do I have it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Damien looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction, a look of strange, sad tenderness breaking through the ice. "No," he said simply. "You have a tiny black card that they missed. And a tremendous amount of courage. But that ledger? Well, you don't know anything about it. I know you don't." In that moment, everything shifted. He wasn't talking like a king to a servant. He was talking like a powerful man laying his trust at the feet of an innocent. He was telling her the absolute truth, not because he had to, but because he saw her vulnerability. Elena realized the complexity of the man before her. He was absolutely ruthless. He had ordered the ambush she heard earlier, but he was also the man who had seen her honesty and staked his own life on it. He didn't want the card back just to protect his empire. He needed it to clear the board and save her. She didn't fear the cold authority in his eyes anymore. She saw the man forced into the role of protector. "Thank you, Damien," she whispered, using his first name for the first time. "For telling me. And for saving me." He nodded, a faint recognition of the shift in their relationship passing over his face. "Go back to your room, Elena. Get some rest. I will be awake. No one will hurt you here." Elena returned to the gigantic, expensive room. She looked at the bed and finally climbed in. The room was still cold, still foreign, but the fear was replaced by a strange, deep sense of assurance. The Ghost King was outside, watching, working, protecting. She had seen the man beneath the title, calculating and dangerous, yes, but a man who had chosen to be her shield. For the first time since she found the heavy gold watch, Elena closed her eyes and, despite the chaos raging outside, felt profoundly, gratefully safe. The dangerous, quiet bond of shared secrecy and sudden reliance had formed, offering her the first real hope she'd had since her life turned upside down. The morning light filtering through the heavy curtains of the safe house room was the most expensive light Elena had ever woken up to. Yet she felt none of the usual comfort of a new day. She felt the heavy, paralyzing reality of her situation. She was a pawn in a game she didn't know she was playing, and her protector was the Ghost King himself. She found Damien exactly where she had left him, in the office, still focused on his screens. He had changed clothes, now wearing a simple black turtleneck and trousers, but his energy remained the same, intense, watchful, and coiled tight. He was on a call, speaking a language she didn't recognize, his voice low and precise. Elena stood silently, waiting until he finished. She needed to talk. She needed to know what part of her past had caused the masked men to chase her down the street. When he finally ended the call and looked up, his expression was neutral, but his eyes conveyed a deep exhaustion. "You should eat something," Damien suggested, gesturing toward a platter of fresh fruit and coffee on the corner of the desk. Elena shook her head. "I need to know what you meant. About my family. You said the Russians think I have a piece of paper connected to my past. What is it?" Damien leaned back in his chair, assessing her honesty and her genuine fear. He realized that to truly protect her he needed the full picture, and that meant asking her to open up the deep locked corners of her memory. "I have done my own research since Marco connected your family name to an old ledger," Damien admitted, his voice grave. "But your family is where the Russians' interest lies. If you want to survive this, I need everything you remember about your father." Elena walked slowly toward the large window, pulling back the heavy curtain just a sliver. The street outside looked ordinary, quiet, utterly safe. A complete lie. "My father," she began, the word feeling distant and foreign. "It's all fragmented like a bad dream. I was maybe 6 or 7 when he left. His name was Luis. He was always dressed neatly. I remember him always being in an office, working late with columns of numbers. He was an accountant, I think." She stopped, trying to pull the blurry images into focus. It was a painful, foggy process. "The house," she continued softly, "we lived in a nice house, but then suddenly we didn't. We moved to a tiny apartment overnight. My mother was always quiet, but after he left she was just silent. She never spoke his name. She burned all his photos, all his papers." Elena turned, facing Damien, her eyes glistening with the effort of dredging up the trauma. "But what I remember most," she whispered, "is the fear. My mother used to lock the door with 3 different locks. And I remember men coming to the door." Damien leaned forward, completely still, listening to every syllable. "Dark suits. They were always quiet, always polite, but their faces were cold. They didn't come to the door once. They came maybe 3 times over a year. They'd ask my mother in a quiet voice, 'Where is Luis? He owes us.' My mother always said she didn't know, and she'd push me behind her skirt. She used to cry silently after they left. Then we moved again, and then we moved again until we were far away from everything." Elena finished, hugging her arms around herself, the memories leaving a chilling residue in the warmth of the room. "That's it. Debt. Suit men. Fear." Damien didn't speak for a long moment. He closed his eyes briefly, connecting the dots that Elena couldn't possibly see. The fragmented story was a terrifying match to the historical information his analysts had dug up. "Elena," Damien began, his voice low with serious weight. "Your father Luis was not just an accountant. He was the chief financial auditor for a powerful faction of the Russian Voroshilov, the organization led by Adrian Kozlov 20 years ago." The name Kozlov meant nothing to Elena, but the sound of it was heavy and final. "When you left suddenly, a massive financial collapse happened. Money was stolen. Accounts were cleaned out. The organization was crippled, and it led to the fall of the Kozlov faction and the rise of the current regime. Your father was the man responsible for the theft. He didn't just owe debt. He betrayed one of the most powerful and ruthless men in the world." Damien stood up, walking to a small table where a map of the city was displayed. "That piece of paper I mentioned, the ledger, that was the account book. It detailed every shell company, every fund, and every dollar that was stolen. That ledger is the last key to that 20-year-old betrayal. Your father took it with him." The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. The shame her mother carried, the constant fear, the quiet poverty, it wasn't just bad luck. It was the aftermath of a catastrophic, life-ruining betrayal. "So the men who chased me," Elena whispered, her face pale. "They aren't looking for the data card. They are looking for me because they think I know where the ledger is. Or they want revenge for what my father did." "Both," Damien confirmed, his eyes fierce. "They think you are holding the final piece of their past. The current Russian leader, Dmitry, he wants that ledger to prove his dominance. But revenge on the daughter of the man who crippled them? That is a very powerful motive." He walked toward her, stopping close enough that she could feel the contained intensity of his presence. "This changes everything, Elena. This is not about a lost watch or an accident. This is historical. This is personal. You are the daughter of the man who betrayed Adrian Kozlov." He looked at her small, trembling frame, and then his expression shifted to one of intense, calculating focus. The look of a man who suddenly understands the entire battlefield. "But there is one thing that I could never confirm in the files," Damien stated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The files say your father, Luis, fled and was presumably executed by Kozlov's men shortly after the theft. But the body was never recovered. No one ever found an official grave. The betrayal was complete, but the accounting wasn't." He looked into her eyes, and the final, shocking revelation hung in the air between them. "Elena," Damien said, holding her gaze. "The Russians don't want the daughter of a dead man. They want the daughter of a man who may in fact not be dead. Your father is the ghost king of their past. And if he's alive, the Russians know you are his only vulnerability." Elena felt dizzy, the cold terror giving way to a strange, sharp focus. Her father, the forgotten man who only existed as a cloud of fear and guilt, might still be out there. The idea was overwhelming, terrifying, and strangely, profoundly hopeful. Damien watched the emotions wash over her face. He saw the devastation of the betrayal, but he also saw the tiny, flickering light of hope for the man who disappeared. He reached out and placed a reassuring, heavy hand on her shoulder, a gesture entirely outside his typical cold professionalism. "I won't let them use you," Damien stated, his voice a low, absolute vow that rang with sincerity. "They will never get to you, Elena. The data card, the revenge, the ledger, I will handle it all. We now know what we are fighting. We are fighting your father's ghosts. And I will protect you from them until they are put to rest." Elena leaned into the touch, taking strength from the sheer force of his will. She had entered the sanctuary scared and confused. Now she understood the battle. She was still terrified, but she had a name for the enemy, and she had the absolute promise of the most dangerous man in the city. Her hope was found not in a peaceful ending, but in the fierce, protective determination of the Ghost King to fight for her. She knew then and there that she was truly safe in his hands. The safe house had felt like a bubble of cold, sterile peace after the previous night's chaos. Now, after the shattering truth about Elena's father, the mood was different. It was heavy with unspoken danger, but also with a strange, fierce connection. Elena and Damien had moved past the stage of polite fear. They were now two people sharing a life raft in a storm. They spent the evening not sleeping but talking quietly over a stark white kitchen counter. Damien was mapping out a strategy to track the missing ledger, using the few forgotten details Elena remembered about her childhood neighborhood. "If your father was hiding from Kozlov," Damien said, tracing a finger across a digital map, "he wouldn't use his old routes. He would disappear completely. But a ledger that big, he would secure it close to the last place he felt truly safe." Elena felt a surprising calm settling over her. She was sitting with a Mafia boss, planning to hunt for a 20-year-old crime ledger, and yet she felt safer than she had in years. She had seen his heart, or at least the protective core beneath his terrifying exterior, and it made all the difference. "He used to take me to a park near the waterfront," Elena recalled, closing her eyes, trying to force the memories. "Not the big famous one. A tiny one. He'd tell me stories about ships. He always seemed relaxed there." Damien nodded, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes for the detail. "We start there. Tomorrow." They finally separated around 3 a.m., both taking rooms on the second floor, the quiet hum of the high-security system their only lullaby. But the sanctuary had already been compromised. One of Damien's trusted lieutenants, a man named Silas who had worked under Damien's command for years, had made a choice. Silas wasn't motivated by loyalty to the Russians. He was motivated by pure, blinding envy of Damien's power. He saw Elena, the civilian distraction, as the perfect opportunity. Silas secretly met with Kozlov's successor, Dmitri, offering him the most valuable piece of information he possessed: the location of Damien Valerio's private, impenetrable safe house. "He's there now," Silas whispered into the phone, standing in a dark, empty storage facility miles away. "He's with the girl, Elena, the daughter of the Kozlov accountant. He is risking everything for her. Take him out now and the organization is yours." Dmitri didn't need to be told twice. He promised Silas power, money, and a swift rise when the Ghost King was gone. The coordinates were sent and the final, brutal assault was put into motion. The alarm didn't scream or wail. It simply gave a single loud synthesized chime, a sound that was immediately followed by the sound of heavy metal being violently splintered. It was 4:15 a.m. Damien was awake instantly. Before the sound had fully died away, he was out of his room, moving down the hall toward Elena's door, a sleek, silenced weapon already in his hand. Elena was thrown from the bed, her heart stopping. The security alarm was a terrifying sound, but the sound of the front door being breached, a single massive crash, was pure nightmare. Damien threw her door open. He didn't speak a full sentence. "Get up. No noise. Stay behind me." He was already moving toward the interior staircase, pulling her along. Downstairs, the battle was already starting. The few guards stationed near the entrance were overwhelmed by the sheer brutal force of the masked men who had just poured in. The sound of rapid, suppressed gunfire was swallowed by the thick walls, sounding like heavy objects dropping onto carpet. "They breached the main defense," Damien whispered to Elena, his eyes scanning the hallway. "This isn't a distraction, this is a kill squad. They knew exactly where to hit." Elena was shaking violently, clutching the back of his shirt. He saw him transform. The cool, calculating businessman was gone, replaced by the predator known as the Ghost King. Every movement was precise, controlled, and lethal. As they reached the end of the hallway, 3 masked men appeared at the top of the stairs, emerging from the dark well of the stairwell. Damien shoved Elena hard behind a heavy antique wardrobe and commanded, "Stay down. Don't move." The air filled with the sharp, thunderous sound of a close-quarters gunfight. Elena kept her eyes squeezed shut, but she couldn't block the noise, the roar of the shots, the sickening impact of bodies hitting the marble floor. It was over in seconds. She heard Damien click something mechanical and then felt his hand grab her wrist. "Move." He didn't take the stairs. He kicked open a linen closet door, revealing not sheets but a small, heavy door set into the back wall. It was a hidden escape route. They scrambled through the narrow, dark tunnel. Damien, breathing hard, was forced to use his weapon twice more as they encountered men who had breached the back perimeter. Elena didn't see the targets, but she saw the muzzle flashes, the quick, efficient violence that left no room for humanity. Then the final devastating blow. As they were scrambling out into the underground parking garage, a masked man suddenly dropped from a ventilation shaft above, landing directly on Damien. The gun skittered across the concrete. The 2 men wrestled fiercely in the dark. Elena watched in pure frozen terror. The Russian was larger, fueled by adrenaline, and he was winning. He grabbed Damien by the throat, slamming him against the cold concrete column. "Tell us where the card is, Valerio," the Russian snarled, his voice muffled by the mask. "Tell us where the ledger is. We take the girl now." Damien struggled, fighting against the chokehold, his face turning dark. He couldn't speak. He reached down and grabbed a piece of broken concrete. But in that moment, in the dim, desperate light, Elena saw it, the flicker in Damien's eyes. He wasn't fighting for his power or his organization. He was fighting for her. He was taking blows that would break an ordinary man, risking his life, his last breath, to ensure the Russian didn't get past him to reach the civilian behind the pillar. This wasn't a transaction. This was sacrifice. The realization slammed into Elena with the force of a tidal wave. This man, this dangerous king, was willing to die right here on the concrete for her. The fear instantly melted into a burning, primal need to help. Elena spotted a discarded lead pipe nearby. He didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy pipe with both hands and swung it with all the desperate strength of a woman fighting for her own life and the life of her protector. The pipe connected with the side of the Russian's head with a sickening crack. The man cried out, his chokehold instantly dissolving as he stumbled back. Damien gasped, sucking air into his lungs. He didn't waste a second. He stood up and finished the job with a brutal single strike that ended the threat. "The car," Damien commanded, already running toward a nearby unmarked vehicle, grabbing her hand and dragging her with him. They burst out of the garage and sped away into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving the breached, ruined safe house behind. The noise of the ambush and the fight was quickly swallowed by the city. In the passenger seat, Elena was shaking, but not just from fear. He looked at Damien. He was breathing heavily, his suit torn, a long, nasty cut bleeding freely near his temple. He was a ruthless fighter, but he was also vulnerable, and he was hurt because of her. "Damien," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He glanced at her quickly, his eyes still hard with combat adrenaline. We're safe. Temporary but safe. I'll get you somewhere else. Elena didn't care about the safe house. She only cared about the man next to her. She reached out, her hand trembling, and gently touched the blood running down his temple. You risked your life, she said, her voice full of awe and gratitude. You were fighting to the death for me. Damien didn't deny it. He didn't try to justify it with talk of the data card or the ledger. He just looked straight ahead, driving hard, and said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "You are innocent, Elena. And I promised you they will not touch you." In that moment of shared raw survival, Elena understood that the strange bond they had formed was real, forged in fire and betrayal. She saw the Ghost King, battered and bleeding, driving into the dangerous night, not as a captor, but as the only person in the world willing to lay down his life for hers. The warmth of that truth, that his cold heart had chosen to shelter her innocence, was the most beautiful, terrifying, and hopeful thing she had ever known. The silence of the new hideout was deafening. It was a small, dusty warehouse loft, cold, impersonal, but far away from the carnage of the safe house. Elena was patching up Damien's wound from the Russians' attack, her hands shaking slightly as she cleaned the cut near his temple. He sat still, allowing her the intimate task, his eyes watching her with a depth she hadn't seen before. He was alive because she had hit a masked man with a pipe. The reality of their shared, messy survival hung thick in the air. "You have to tell me," Elena whispered, her voice raw. She placed a small bandage over the cut. "You almost died tonight. You keep saying the card is important, but you risked everything for it. What is on that tiny piece of plastic?" Damien inhaled slowly, the tension in his powerful frame easing slightly as he accepted her care. He knew he had to tell her the whole truth now. There were no more secrets between them. She had literally saved his life. "The card," Damien began, his voice low and weary, "is not just a financial record. It's a digital truce. It's the reason Kozlov's successor, Dmitri, and I haven't been in an open, bloody war for the last 3 years." He stood up and walked to the dirty window, looking out at the skyline, his silhouette hard and sharp against the faint city lights. "It contains financial records so sensitive they could expose both of us. But more importantly, they give us leverage over each other." He turned back to her, his gaze steady and demanding. "On one side, it details every hidden deal I have made to keep my power. If that is released, my allies become enemies and my foundation crumbles. It shows the weak points in my armor." Elena nodded, her fear growing as she realized the true stakes. "And on Kozlov's side," Damien continued, "the card proves everything. It details his off-the-books weapon shipments. It shows who he sells to, who he buys from, and the specific illegal trades he runs through 3 continents. If that information is made public, governments would step in. Kozlov and Dmitri would be destroyed completely. The card is a mutually assured destruction clause." He walked toward her, looking down at her wide, horrified eyes. "I knew it was dangerous, but as long as I possessed it, I had control. I had leverage to keep the peace and to keep them from coming after your father's ledger. The card and the ledger are 2 sides of the same threat." Elena felt a cold, sick wave wash over her. She gripped the edge of the cheap table to steady herself. The stakes weren't a few $1,000,000. They were global organized crime, and she was in the middle of it. "And that," Damien concluded, his voice heavy, "is why I was willing to die for it. Losing the card means the war starts now." Elena couldn't hold it in anymore. The shock, the guilt, the horror of her own completely innocent carelessness. It broke her. Tears sprang to her eyes, thick and fast, sliding down her cheeks. "Damien," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper, thick with devastating realization. I destroyed you. I destroyed both of you." He knelt beside her, his expression instantly shifting from cold strategist to concerned protector. "What are you talking about?" "The card. When I found the watch, the card fell out in my coat pocket and then it fell out again at work the next day." She was sobbing now, the guilt consuming her. "It looked like a piece of plastic packaging. I didn't know. I didn't know it was real. I tossed it, Damien. I tossed it in the junk drawer behind the counter at the Comet Diner. The one where we keep the old menus and the rubber bands." The air in the small loft went still. Damien froze, his features turning to stone. The image of the anonymous cluttered junk drawer, the drawer his meticulous men would never have thought to check, flashed through his mind. He stood up, grabbing the secure phone he used for private communication. He turned his back to Elena, trying to keep his absolute shock from showing. "Marco," he commanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Stop all tracking of the Russians. I need you to go to the diner. The junk drawer behind the counter, near the waitress's station. You will find a tiny black plastic card there. I need it now. Do not fail me." He ended the call, the silence of the room punctuated only by Elena's muffled sobs. It was the longest 10 minutes of Elena's life. She watched Damien pace, the contained energy of his terror vibrating through the room. He didn't look at her, and she thought that silence was the sound of his hatred, the moment he realized she was the accidental bomb that blew up his empire. Then the phone rang. Damien snatched it up instantly. "Report." Marco's voice crackled across the speaker, tight with failure. "Boss, we got there. The police tape is still up, but the building is cold. We found the junk drawer. It was open. Everything was scattered. We checked every inch. We ran an infrascan." Pause. A slow, agonizing, definitive pause. "Sir, the Russians knew to come back after the ambush failed. After they hit the safe house, they came back to the one place that was overlooked. The card is gone, boss. Dmitri has it." The words hung in the air, heavy and fatal. Damien slowly lowered the phone. He didn't look angry, he looked absolutely defeated. The game was over. The safety net was gone. The war was no longer an anticipated threat. It was a devastating reality starting right now. Elena, watching his collapse, slid off the chair and crumpled to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. "I'm so sorry, Damien. I didn't know. I never meant to." Damien did the unexpected. He dropped the phone, and instead of leaving, he walked over to her, knelt down on the cold, dirty floor and pulled her into his arms. He held her tight, his cheek resting against the top of her head. "It is not your fault, Elena," he stated, his voice quiet but filled with a fierce, absolute resolve. "It was my fault. I underestimated Kozlov's successor. I left the card in the field. I dragged you into my war." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes, which were wet with tears. "Listen to me. The card is gone. The war has started. They have my secrets and they have Kozlov's secrets. The game is over." He pulled her closer, his embrace firm and protective. "But you are still here. I'm still here. We are a unit now, Elena. They want the ledger and they want revenge for your father. They think the card was a distraction and now they will focus entirely on you." He lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. The look in his eyes was fierce, protective, and unmistakably loving. "We are trapped, yes. We are in the center of a firestorm. But they can take my empire, they can leak my secrets, but they will not take you. You are the only thing that matters now." Elena and Damien were moving through the shadows, establishing their new operational rhythm. Elena, now an active partner, was poring over digitized family records and old city maps Damien had provided, searching for a place her father might have hidden the ledger. Damien, meanwhile, was fighting a desperate, quiet war on the outside, trying to secure their finances and counter the leaks from the now-exposed data card. It was Marco, the loyal right-hand man, who brought the chilling news. He arrived at their new heavily fortified location, a derelict printing press facility, his face pale and tight with grief and rage. "It's Silas, boss," Marco reported, his voice raw. Silas, the lieutenant who had betrayed them, had been caught by the Russians, not rewarded. "They found him near the docks this morning. Executed." Damien closed his eyes for a brief moment, a flash of cold fury crossing his face. Silas had been a traitor, but he had been Damien's man. This was a direct insult, a public display of dominance. Marco lowered his voice, the next piece of information hitting harder. "But the message wasn't for him. It was for you, boss." Marco held out a photograph on his secure tablet. The image showed Silas's body, positioned deliberately. Pinned to the dead man's jacket with a long, cruel knife was a small, torn piece of paper. Scrawled on the paper in heavy black ink was an address. It was Elena's childhood home. The house her mother had fled 2 decades ago, the place where Elena remembered the cold, dark suits coming to the door. Elena gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, stumbling back a step. The Russians weren't just playing games with corporate betrayal. They were digging up her most vulnerable, painful past and using it as a weapon. They knew exactly who she was and exactly what they wanted. Damien walked over and gently pulled the tablet from Marco's hand. He studied the image, his jaw rigid. The message was unmistakable. We know who you are protecting, Valerio. We know her past. And we know where she comes from. There is nowhere to hide. The Russian ultimatum, the public execution of a former lieutenant pinned with the location of her childhood, shattered the tense calm of the printing press facility. Damien turned away from the photograph, his resolve to protect Elena hardening into a painful single-minded focus. His war had now fully consumed her, and he couldn't bear the thought of her fragile innocence being destroyed by the vengeance of Adrian Kozlov's ghost. He turned to Elena, his voice stripped bare of the Ghost King's usual cold authority. It was just Damien pleading with the woman he loved. "It's time, Elena," he stated, walking toward her. He spoke quietly, intensely, as if every word was a physical effort. "You have to leave the city. Tonight." Elena stared at him, confused. "Leave? We just found the first link to my father's clues. We can't stop now." "Yes, we can," Damien insisted, his voice rising with urgency. "They have the card, Elena. They are winning. They are making a public display, and next time the target will be you. I can arrange a clean exit. New papers, a new name, a small, quiet place far away, maybe South America or the quiet parts of Europe. You can start over." He reached out and took her hands, his eyes intense and pleading. "You deserve a peaceful life, Elena. You deserve sunshine and predictability, not this filth. I can buy you that. I will arrange money, security, everything. You go. You start again. And I will deal with the Russians." "And you?" Elena asked, her voice trembling, not from fear of the Russians, but from the sudden, devastating fear of losing him. "I will clean up the mess," Damien said, his features hardening again, putting the king back on the mask. "I will neutralize the threat. It will take time, but I have resources. I will make sure Kozlov and Dmitri are occupied until the threat against you is eliminated." "And then what?" she asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "You deal with them and I sit on a beach somewhere waiting for a signal that may never come? Waiting to see if the man I love survived the war I started." Damien flinched at her use of the word love. It hit him hard, revealing the depth of his own impossible feelings. "You won't have to wait," he whispered, his voice catching. "You will be safe, and that's all that matters. You deserve better than a man whose very existence attracts assassins. I am a storm, Elena. And you need to be far away from the rain." Elena pulled her hands free from his grasp, her eyes blazing with the same fierce resolve he had witnessed when she chose to fight back. Her vulnerability was gone, replaced by an iron will forged by survival and love. "Stop it, Damien," she commanded, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Stop trying to shelter me. You cannot give me a peaceful life by forcing me to abandon myself." She took a step back, making sure he understood her stance. "I found the watch. I was the one who was stalked. My father is the reason this war has escalated. This is my past and I will not run from it. If I leave now, I am proving to the Russians that I am nothing but a weak liability you were protecting. I will be living in perpetual fear, and they will only find me eventually." She walked toward him, closing the distance he had tried to create. "You said I was your weakness, and then you said you would make me your strength. You cannot take that back now. You cannot save me by leaving yourself exposed and alone. That is not love, Damien. That is cowardice, and you are not a coward." "It's protection," he argued, the strain evident in his voice. "It's abandonment," she shot back. "The only reason I have survived this is because I chose to trust my gut over my fear, and my gut tells me that my place is here. With you." She placed her hand flat against his chest, right over his racing heart. "The bond we share, the fact that you put your life on the line for me, that is stronger than any secret ledger and stronger than Kozlov's hatred. I will not abandon you, and I will not abandon the only chance I have left to find out what happened to my father." Her eyes were fixed on his, full of defiant, uncompromising devotion. "If you try to put me on a plane, I will scream. I will run. I will make a scene. But I will not leave you to face this war alone. We face the storm together." Damien looked at her, truly looked at the woman who stood before him. She was not the fearful waitress anymore. She was a warrior, claiming her place at his side, challenging his authority with nothing but pure, selfless love. He saw the potential of his greatest weakness, the woman he loved, transforming into his most vital asset. He closed his eyes, accepting the inevitable. The fight was over. When he opened his eyes, the cold mask was gone. He looked at her with a depth of emotion that was almost painful. He pulled her against him, crushing her close, burying his face in her hair. "My weakness," he murmured, his voice husky with love and despair. "My beautiful, impossible weakness." He knew the danger was absolute, but the feeling of her small, resolute body pressed against his, refusing to break, was the only thing holding his world together. He accepted her choice, accepted the danger, and accepted the fierce, emotional connection that now defined their war. The Russian ultimatum had failed to drive her away. Instead, it had driven them closer. They were bound, unified, and standing on the edge of the abyss, ready to fight for each other against every threat closing in. The emotional intensity of their shared decision to fight together was immediately put to the ultimate test. Damien was already organizing the intelligence gathered from Silas's location and the chaos of the safe house breach, searching for any pattern that would lead them to the missing ledger. Elena, now operating from a position of partnership, was digging into her father's old, mundane habits. Damien's security expert, working to decrypt some residual data recovered from the breached safe house systems before the Russians wiped it clean, discovered a small, secure line of communication. It wasn't Damien's. It belonged to the traitor Silas. Hours later, Marco brought the decrypted communication file to Damien and Elena. They gathered around the screen in the dusty loft, the single bulb hanging overhead casting harsh shadows on their tired faces. The communication wasn't between Silas and Dmitry Kozlov. It was between Silas and an independent contractor who specialized in long-term high-security confinement. The text was terse but devastating. "We have him. Valerio protecting the girl. Confine until exchange is ordered. The asset is confirmed stable." The asset. Him. Damien looked at Elena, his face a mask of cold realization. He had suspected the lack of a body meant Luis Perez, Elena's father, was still alive, but now they had proof. "Your father isn't a ghost, Elena," Damien said, his voice flat with the shock of the discovery. "He's an asset. They didn't kill him 20 years ago. Kozlov has been holding him as leverage all this time." Elena sank onto a crate, the air rushing out of her lungs. Her mind reeled. The man she had mourned, the source of her mother's permanent, quiet grief, was alive. He was a prisoner, but he was alive. 20 years of running, of fear, of wondering, all for a man who was being kept under lock and key by the enemy. Kozlov. Elena whispered, the name tasting like ash. He didn't want revenge. He wanted control. Precisely, Damien confirmed, his strategic mind already racing ahead. The missing accountant is the ultimate key. The missing ledger is nothing compared to the man who wrote it. Kozlov kept him alive, knowing one day he would need him to break someone, or to demand an exchange. The ultimate exchange was demanded hours later. It was delivered in a chilling, theatrical manner. A small, personalized wooden box was left on the doorstep of the derelict printing press facility. Marco handled the retrieval, checking it carefully for explosives before bringing it inside. The box contained a pristine, unencrypted data stick, a copy of the information from the missing card, and a brief, typewritten note. The note was signed by Dmitry Kozlov, but the demands were clearly orchestrated by the older, more patient Adrian Kozlov. "Valerio, the game is over. We have your card and now we know the price of silence. The girl's father, Luis Perez, is alive and well. He belongs to us. You will bring us Elena and the original decrypted card. In exchange we will give you Luis Perez, the missing accountant. No guards. No tricks. Come alone. This is the only way the war stops." The demand was absolute, ruthless and brilliant. It pitted Damien's newfound love against the need for closure that Elena desperately needed. Elena snatched the note from the table, reading the words, Elena and the original decrypted card. The Russians had the copy, but they knew only Damien could decrypt the original, and they wanted that power locked away. But more than the card, they wanted Elena, the daughter of their great betrayer, the prize in their long-waiting game. "He's asking me to sacrifice myself," Elena said, her voice shaking. "He wants to destroy you by taking the only thing you care about, and he wants to destroy me by taking the leverage I represent." Elena felt a profound, agonizing division in her heart. 20 years of longing, of unspoken pain, was suddenly given a name and a location. She could see her father, hear his voice, finally find out why he left her. It was the only thing she had ever truly wanted. But she also knew the truth. Kozlov wouldn't let her father go, and he would never let her live. She was the witness, the vulnerability, and the daughter of the man they hated most. She looked at Damien, his expression set in cold, absolute fury. "I have to go," Elena whispered, her eyes filling with tears of conflicted devotion. "I have to see him, Damien. I have to know why he left. If I trade myself, you are safe and I get 5 minutes with my father. It's worth it." "No," Damien snarled, slamming his fist onto the table, the force rattling the equipment. "You will not sacrifice yourself. You will not walk into that trap. They will kill you both and I will be left with nothing but ruin." "But he's my father," she pleaded, the emotional weight of 2 decades crashing down on her. "He is leverage." Damien roared back, forcing the harsh truth into the room. "He let you run and hide for 20 years. He is a ghost who suddenly reappears to drag you into his grave. You will not go." Elena walked to him, placing her hands on his chest, her touch gentle but firm. "I won't abandon you and I won't abandon myself. But I have to know. Please. We have to find another way." Damien looked down at the woman who had faced assassins and demanded answers. He had wanted her to run, but now he knew he could never let her go. Her willingness to sacrifice herself for the chance to see her father was the purest act of love he had ever witnessed, and it broke him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "We are not trading you," Damien vowed, his voice low, fierce, and absolute. "We are not doing anything that ends with you in that man's hands. He wants the card and he wants you. He won't get either." He pulled back, his eyes burning with a desperate, self-sacrificing resolve. "I will go," Damien stated. "I will tell them I will give them the decrypted card in exchange for your father's location. I will buy us time. I will put myself in the line of fire." "No," Elena cried, terrified. "They'll kill you. They hate you more than they hate my father." "They hate me, yes, but they need me," Damien countered, his lips curving into a grim, cold smile of the Ghost King. "They need the full decrypted card to truly cripple my organization, and they need a live exchange to get to you later. I have leverage they don't know about. I will handle Kozlov. I will promise him the card. I will buy us the time to find the ledger and find your father's location." He looked at her, his eyes full of love and finality. "I will sacrifice myself if I have to get you the truth and get you safely away. I have nothing left to lose except you, Elena. And I promise you I will never let them touch you." His promise was a final, devastating declaration of his love. He was willing to walk into the lion's den to trade his freedom, his power, and potentially his life, not for his empire, but for the one woman who had shown him what honesty and true courage looked like. The danger was complete, but the bond between them was the only light left in the growing darkness. The ultimate decision was made. Damien would use the promise of the decrypted card to force a face-to-face meeting with Dmitry Kozlov, aiming to locate Luis Perez and end the feud. Elena, now operating with cold, terrifying purpose, used the brief reprieve to focus entirely on the clues to the ledger, believing it was the only true insurance policy they had left. The morning of the exchange dawned cold and gray, but there would be no clean trade. The meeting was set for a massive, abandoned factory complex on the edge of the city, a vast, echoing space designed for a bloody spectacle. Damien went, but he didn't go alone. He went with Marco and a small elite contingent, moving like shadows under the cover of the industrial ruins. This was not a negotiation. This was a surgical invasion led by the Ghost King himself. As Damien entered the main hall, leaving Marco and his team concealed, he saw Kozlov's successor, Dmitry, waiting with a heavy guard. But it was the man standing slightly behind Dmitry who caught Damien's eye, the former lieutenant, Silas, who had betrayed him at the safe house. Silas hadn't been killed by the Russians. Kozlov had used the execution as bait. Silas was alive, standing in the enemy's ranks, enjoying his newfound temporary power. "Valerio," Dmitry greeted him, a cruel smile splitting his face. "You came alone. Your courage is noted. Where is Luis Perez?" Damien demanded, his voice ringing with absolute control, ignoring the pleasantries. "I have the decrypted card, but I will not hand over the key until I see the accountant." Dmitry chuckled, gesturing to a smaller, shadowed container at the far end of the hall. "Patience, Valerio. First, the girl. The girl is not here, Damien stated, his eyes locked on Silas. She's my insurance. He comes when Luis is free. I am here for the man and for the promise of the ledger he stole. Now show me the accountant. At that signal, a hidden door on the container slid open, revealing the horrific truth. Elena's father, Luis Perez, was there. But he was not well. He was slumped against the cold metal wall, gaunt and heavily chained, his eyes dull with 20 years of captivity and fear. He was barely clinging to life. "Father!" Elena screamed, though she wasn't there. She was listening on a live, secure feed hidden miles away, coordinating their next move. Seeing the gaunt, broken man who was the source of her entire existence shattered her. Damien walked slowly toward the container, his mind racing. He had to keep the exchange moving to give Elena time to execute their plan. He looked at Luis Perez and then looked directly at Silas, the traitor. "You are a fool, Silas," Damien stated, his voice cutting through the tension. "You betrayed me for a seat at Kozlov's table, but they showed the world your corpse. You are already dead." Silas snarled, reaching for his weapon, but Damien was faster. That was the cue. Damien's concealed team erupted from their positions. Marco and the others moved with fierce, practiced speed, targeting Kozlov's men with ruthless, non-lethal precision. The vast hall dissolved into chaos. Damien ignored the initial firefight. He moved with brutal, focused efficiency. He closed the distance to Silas in 3 massive strides. "The Ghost King does not tolerate treachery," Damien hissed, his eyes cold and final. He moved with an almost superhuman blur. The fight was quick, savage, and absolute. Damien cornered Silas against the wall and ended the betrayal with a single decisive move that fulfilled the bloody promise of the Mafia world. The traitor fell, silenced forever. While the chaos erupted in the hall, Elena and Marco's tech expert raced to the container where Luis Perez was being held. They found him weak but conscious. "Father," Elena wept, rushing to his side, freeing him from the rusty chains. Luis Perez looked at her, his eyes struggling to focus. "So, Elena, you shouldn't be here. The ledger. The ledger is everything." He was obsessed with the secret even at the edge of death. "Where is it, father?" Elena pleaded, holding his frail body up. "Where did you hide the Kozlov ledger?" Luis weakly pointed a trembling finger to a small, nearly invisible scratch mark on the floor of the container. "Underneath. The first place I knew was safe. The lighthouse." He couldn't finish. His eyes closed and his body went slack in her arms. 20 years of isolation and fear had finally taken their toll. Elena held her father's dead body, weeping not only for his death but for the tragic waste of his life, a life sacrificed for a secret. But the final clue was given. The lighthouse. Elena looked up, hardened by the sudden, painful loss. He was not a victim anymore. She was the heir to her father's secret. "We have to go," she commanded the tech expert, her voice ringing with grim resolve. The lighthouse. Now. Damien stood victorious over the neutralized Russian forces. He had killed the traitor and ensured the survival of his men, cementing his reputation as the most dangerous force in the city. But the ultimate victory felt hollow. He saw Elena emerge from the container, tears streaking her face, but her eyes burning with an unshakable, purposeful fire. She gave him a small, desperate shake of her head. Her father was gone. But her look also conveyed the final, necessary clue. Damien met Dmitry Kozlov's eyes across the bloody, echoing hall. Dmitry, defeated and watching his empire crumble under the Ghost King's precision, knew the fight was lost. Damien walked toward him, the bloody knife from Silas's execution still in his hand. "The war stops now," Damien stated, his voice absolute. "You lost your leverage. You lost your men. And now I will find the ledger." He held up the original encrypted data card. "I have the keys to your secrets, Dmitry. I have the power to destroy every trade, every ally, every shipment you have. And soon I will have the final devastating secrets of your entire lineage. What do you demand?" Dmitry asked, his voice thick with defeat. "I demand peace," Damien replied. "You end the feud. You stop the pursuit of Elena. You swear on the name of your ancestors that my territory and my people are safe forever. And in return..." Damien looked at the data card, the object that had nearly cost him his life and the woman he loved. With a final, decisive movement, he smashed the card against the concrete floor, shattering it into a dozen worthless pieces. In return, Damien finished, his voice final, I destroy the mutual destruction clause. The card is gone. The secrets are safe, for now. But if you ever touch Elena, if you ever pursue the ledger, I will find a way to bleed your secrets from the grave. Do you understand? Dmitri, witnessing the sheer audacity and finality of the sacrifice, nodded in stunned submission. The war was over, won not through acquisition of the ledger, but through the ruthless sacrifice of the ultimate leverage. In the days that followed, the bloodshed was cleaned, the silence was bought, and the war ended. Elena found the Kozlov ledger hidden beneath the floorboards of the abandoned lighthouse her father had pointed to, secured by a code that only his small daughter would have remembered. It was the final devastating proof of the old betrayal, now secured by the daughter who had paid the price for its theft. Damien, his empire severely shaken but intact, stood with Elena at the docks watching the rising sun. They were scarred, changed, and burdened by the weight of the secrets and the violence they had witnessed. Elena had lost her father, her innocence, and her simple life, but she had gained the truth and the unwavering, fierce love of the Ghost King. She looked at Damien, his face still bearing the signs of the trauma and the fight. What now, Damien? She asked, her voice soft but steady. Damien took her hand, his gaze direct and filled with love. Now we build. We don't hide and we don't run. We use the ledger as the ultimate protection, and we use the peace we bought to start over. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, her strength now his anchor. You are not a waitress anymore, Elena. You are the woman who stood against the Mafia. You are the woman who saved me from myself. And you are safe. We are safe. And we will build a future together, one day at a time, where only the light and the honesty you showed me is allowed to survive. Elena leaned into his warmth, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. The price of peace was high, bought with blood and sacrifice, but standing with Damien, armed with the truth and bound by an unbreakable love, she knew they had survived the darkness. Their journey was just beginning, but they faced it together, stronger than any king or any ghost could ever be. The war was over, but the silence that followed the bloodshed was not peaceful. It was hollow. The Kozlov faction was crippled, the secrets of the data card destroyed, and the missing ledger secured. Elena had closure regarding her father, Luis Perez, whose body was flown quietly home to her mother, finally laying his ghost to rest. But the physical war had only given way to a quiet, emotional distance. In the opulent but sterile environment of Damien's penthouse, the true headquarters of the Valerio Empire, Elena found herself completely safe, completely surrounded by luxury and completely alone. Damien had retreated. He spent his days in his command center, rebuilding the alliances shattered by the card leak, securing his defenses and reasserting his control over the city. He worked with the cold, relentless efficiency of the Ghost King, pushing himself far away from the emotional vulnerability the war had exposed. He insisted she stay. He insisted she had access to anything she needed. He ensured her mother was taken care of. But he refused to stay with her. His self-imposed distance was motivated by a painful, absolute conviction. He was poison. Elena deserved the peace he had bought for her, a life free from the violence and moral compromises that defined his world. He had pulled her out of the storm, and now he felt he must release her to the sunshine. He had risked his life for her safety. Now he risked his heart for her freedom. When they spoke, it was about logistics, security arrangements, the final disposition of the Kozlov ledger, and the future of her mother. He never spoke of the night in the garage, the confessions of love, or the shared moments of terror. You need to decide where you want to go, Elena, Damien stated one evening, standing stiffly in the doorway of the penthouse living area, holding himself like a fortress. I can arrange a life anywhere in the world. You have enough resources now that you never have to worry again. Choose peace. I don't want peace, Damien, Elena replied, her voice steady but heartbroken. I want you. I am not peace, he returned, his eyes cold and distant. I am a perpetual fight. I am the darkness you stumbled into. You fought bravely, but now it is over. You earned your way out. Elena realized that his silence, his distance, was his final, greatest attempt to save her. Even if it meant destroying their love. She couldn't allow it. She had faced masked men, she had held her dead father, and she had stood against the Ghost King's rivals. She would not allow the Ghost King to sacrifice their future for a misguided sense of honor. She walked to the door of his private office, found the code from Marco and stepped inside. Damien was sitting at his massive desk, bathed in the cool light of his monitors, the ultimate portrait of power and isolation. "I won't leave," Elena stated simply, closing the door behind her. Damien sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Elena, we have discussed this. You are free. Take your freedom." "I have freedom, Damien. That is why I am standing here," she countered, walking toward his desk. "You keep talking about what I deserve. You think I deserve a life free of violence. Maybe I do. But I also deserve a life that is honest." She stood directly across the desk from him, leaning forward. "Do you think I was happy as a waitress? I was exhausted and alone. I was running from the memory of a father I never knew. I was living a life that was quiet, yes, but it wasn't honest. It wasn't me." Her voice softened, filled with the devastating clarity of her journey. "The moment I chose to return that watch, my life became honest. Every choice I made since, the fear, the courage, the decision to swing a pipe at an assassin, it all led me to this room. It all led me to you." She placed her hands flat on the smooth wood of the desk, forcing him to look away from his screens and into her eyes. "You think you are saving me by pushing me away. You are wrong. You are condemning me to a life that will feel quieter than death, because I will be living without the only man who ever saw the truth of who I am. You saw the courage in me before I even saw it myself. You are the only person who knows what I am capable of." Tears finally welled in her eyes, not from fear but from the depth of her love. "The violence is part of your life, Damien. The ruthlessness is what keeps you alive. But the love, the protection, the willingness to die for a stranger, that is also part of you. And that is the part one choose." Damien listened, utterly still. He saw her pain, her resolve, and the uncompromising strength that defined her. She wasn't asking for shelter. She was asking for partnership. She wasn't running from the darkness. She was choosing the one light she found within it. The fortress around his heart finally crumbled. He saw the truth. His attempt to save her life was a desperate attempt to avoid the pain of losing her. But she had made the choice for them both. He stood up, walking around the desk. He stopped directly in front of her, his shadow engulfing her slightly. He was the Ghost King, damaged, dangerous, and irrevocably in love. "My life is an ongoing battlefield, Elena," he warned one last time, his voice a ragged whisper. "There will always be shadows. There will always be a price." "I know," she replied, her gaze firm. "And I choose to stand in the light you give me, and I choose to stand in the shadow with you. I choose the danger because I choose the honesty. I choose us." Damien took a slow, deep breath, releasing the fear and the self-sacrifice. He looked at her, truly seeing his future, fraught with danger but brilliant with love. He slowly reached out his hand to her. It was a hand that had signed death warrants, a hand that was currently stained with the blood of betrayal, a hand that was accustomed to holding power, not pleading for acceptance. He didn't speak. He simply offered his hand, a gesture of absolute vulnerability, a silent question. "Am I worthy of the life you offer me?" Elena looked at the hand, the powerful, dangerous, redeeming hand of the Ghost King. She saw the scars of his battles, the weight of his empire, and the silent promise of a life filled with purpose and peril. He took it. Elena placed her own hand, the soft, once calloused hand of the waitress who had swung a pipe to save his life, firmly into his. Her small, resolute hand fit perfectly into his large, powerful one. "Yes," she whispered, her smile luminous with hope and resolve. "We stand together. Now tell me how we use this ledger to build a better kingdom." He gripped her hand, a fierce, protective light returning to his eyes. The uncertain dawn was breaking, bringing with it danger, but also the unbreakable, defiant promise of a love that had survived the impossible. We have come to the end of the story. Thank you for watching to the end. Share your opinion about this story in the comments below. I like getting feedback from my audience. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories.